Hello, you're watching Stretford Paddock. We're here for the paper talk this morning as we look at the news that it seems, well, it's sort of it kind of offers both sides of the same coin. It's a report in the Evening Standard that Manchester United are keen potentially on Koulibaly, but also think that maybe Eric Bailly, his recent form and his return from injury could be enough to stop us signing him. Maybe we don't need him after all. Like I said, this is coming out from the Evening Standard. There's also reports in TalkSport that we'll get onto as well in a little bit. It says here that United, Solskjaer has a list of 5 strikers drawn up, so this is part of a larger scale transfer plan. He said amongst those considered were Haaland. Obviously we lost to Dortmund, Moussa Dembele and Timo Werner. They then go on to say, as for central defence, Solskjaer has high hopes for Axel Tuanzebe if the academy graduate can maintain his fitness, which it seems to be a problem with all of our centre-backs. Phil Jones, Eric Bailly, Axel Tuanzebe, all of them seem to struggle keeping fitness and have struggled with their fitness throughout their careers. But like I said, they go on to say here that Eric Bailly's recent performances have also sparked hope he could prove an ideal foil for Maguire without having to splash out in the region of £100 million for Koulibaly. It's a strange timing of that, where it says his recent form. He's played, 2 matches since he came back from injury. It's not like he's played 20 games this season and looked brilliant. He looked good in those games. Obviously, he played against Chelsea, and he came back and played, was it against Watford that he played? Or maybe against Bruges. But he looked all right. I'm surprised that would be enough potentially to end our interest in Koulibaly. Let me know what you think to those reports. The United family thought it was already wrapped up. A few reports from a few months back. Well, it's very good that you mentioned that, because I was just going to go on to talk about this new news comes in contrast to what was described as a huge step in this transfer by TalkSport in January. So, it was obviously a couple of months ago now, but this was when, in case you don't remember or you didn't see the news, that an Italian journalist, Fabio Santini, how reliable is he? We don't know, was speaking on a TV show called Il Prosecco or Processo. I mean, they must get called Il Prosecco quite a lot. One of the most bubbling TV shows on the air, and he said that Napoli will sell Kalidou Koulibaly to Man United for a figure of around 70 to 75 million euros, which is about 60 million quid. He said it seems all done. It's an interesting one. He said naturally such a deal will be closed only in June and certainly not in January in the winter transfer window. So that was the reports coming out of Italy in January saying that, a deal is seemingly done, acting just such a casual way of saying it. It seems all done, like he's not the person breaking this huge news. So that sort of casual approach to the transfer and to those quotes made it seem as though that there was something afoot with that, maybe that he was kind of speaking out of turn or he was kind of jumping the gun slightly on that news. But do you think that Eric Bailly potentially and our other centre-back options mean that we don't need Kalidou Koulibaly? Someone saying that the 80 million is needed elsewhere, still not worth 60 million. Koulibaly is one of those players, isn't he, that... Do you remember in the 90s when there were so many players across Europe, especially in Italy, that just because you didn't really watch much Italian football and not games went on TV as much, they had this aura about them. They had this kind of distant they're on this sort of mountaintop of foreign football. There were the likes of Batistuta and Ronaldo and Zidane in the 90s as well, Inzaghi and Trezeguet, these sorts of players, where you didn't really know how good they were. You just knew that they were rated highly in these names, these sort of revered names. Koulibaly to me is that kind of player where it's like, how good actually is he? Because everyone thinks he's good. Everyone thought he was 6'5" until 2 months ago when we realised he's actually only 6'1". Like, people don't even know how tall he is, let alone how good he is. So it is interesting. We've seen him play against Liverpool in the Champions League. I think in one of those games he looked all right, and recently he looked pretty good. But we've seen him sort of done a couple of times. Let me know what you think to Koulibaly, whether you think he would be... it seems obvious, but would he be an improvement over Lindelof and Bailly? It seems like he probably would be. He's obviously rated very highly, but how much do we actually know about him? Other than the fact that he's, supposed to be this sort of defensive rock. Is he good at playing out from the back? That's obviously something that Solskjaer rates quite highly. certainly more than Mourinho rated it. Will he fit the system at United? There's been talks recently of David De Gea. Obviously, he's been making a few mistakes, but even before those mistakes, talks that his sort of style of play doesn't command his box well enough. He doesn't play out from the back well enough. Potentially leading to a sale of De Gea, just because he doesn't fit the system. So, would Koulibaly be worth splashing out 60 to 80 million for a player that may not fit the system that we play anyway? Look how great Smalling is playing in Italy. Yeah, that's a good point. If Smalling had never played for United, let's say he'd gone from, who would be the team? Say he'd gone from Leicester, English player, left Leicester, gone to Italy, looked one of Roma's best players. United would be linked with him now for probably about 45, 50 million. Italy is a strange league, and it allows certain players and certain types of player to thrive in ways that the Premier League doesn't. Look at the likes of, Immobile, who struggled in Germany. Look at the likes of Dzeko, who was pretty good for City, but got 30 league goals a couple of years ago. Higuain again, I think he still has the record for most goals in a league season in Italy, and he looked completely out of his depth and unfit in England just 18 months later. So Italy is a strange league, especially when it comes to translating from that league to the Premier League. Someone saying they'd rather get Issa Diop for 30 to 40 million. Again, a lot of people seem to be keen on Issa Diop. I agree with Ross, we need to spend elsewhere before we can turn back to centre-back. Well, let's speak of elsewhere then, because another huge transfer story that we've been seeing, and actually these quotes coming from Stephen Howson's Warmdown podcast, which has just been released with David Ornstein. So if you haven't seen that, which you haven't because it hasn't been up long enough for you to have seen it all the way through, make sure you check that out as soon as you finish watching this, because of course David Ornstein, hugely reliable journalist working for The Athletic, has been on that podcast talking about a number of things. A very good podcast, but one of the key cuts we're looking at is his mention of Jadon Sancho when asked about the potential move for the Dortmund player. He said, and I quote, as things stand, I think Manchester United are looking the most likely option, which is obviously huge. It comes off the back of, I think it was Mick Murphy in the Telegraph yesterday, looking at this Sancho kind of transfer as well, saying that United leading the race, that sort of thing. But David Ornstein, who, like I said, is very well revered, very well known, and very highly rated in terms of his transfer reliability, is coming out and saying to us that United are looking that most likely option, that there is a chance, and there is a good chance, that United can get this done. Do you think that we are sort of drifting towards this Sancho signing? Do you think there's going to be some kind of interruptions, other teams coming in? There was talk of Liverpool coming in for him but not wanting to ruin their wage structure. Chelsea being another team that have been linked quite heavily with him, but they've bought Hakim Ziyech. Is it Hakim Ziyech? It's certainly Ziyech, that they've bought recently. So it almost seems like, I wouldn't say too easy, but you just sort of walk in, Sancho's there, you walk in, there's nothing in the way of him, and it just feels like it's going to sign for us. But obviously loads of things can change, and they can change very quickly. People still talking in the comments about a potential Koulibaly signing, that Twanzebe playing last night. Yeah, I mean, we've got centre-backs. We definitely have centre-backs. It's just whether they're good enough. And do we, is Sancho the perfect signing for United? We've struggled. I don't think we've bought an out-and-out right-wing player that was bought to play right-wing, that played right-wing, since, who was the last one? Ronaldo? Di Maria kind of played right wing, but he ended up playing centre mid quite a lot for under Van Gaal. I can't even think of the last player we bought to be a right winger. So it's a position we've been. I guess Valencia would have been the last one. We haven't bought a right winger that played at right wing for any meaningful period of time since we bought Valencia from Wigan in, I think, 2008, something like that. So it's been a long time coming, and it's clearly a player and a position that Solskjaer is keen on. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. That's still doubtful we can even get Sancho. Well, there's obviously going to be doubts. It's going to be a huge signing if we do get him. So those sorts of huge signings take a bit of work and are always kind of feel like they're not going to happen until they do happen. Obviously, with Pogba, it seemed as though that signing would never make it over the line until it did. So I have to say, a lot of talk still about Koulibaly in the comments. Some quite quite interesting and aggressive anti-Koulibaly sentiment in the comments. Not quite sure where that's come from. Someone saying Koulibaly before anybody. Someone saying, I think we should wrap Werner up for 51 million. That seems like a bargain. Werner's one of those where I almost think the sort of accessibility of his release clause makes it less likely for us to get him, not more likely. I think the fact that Sancho will be 110 million, the fact that he will want 200 grand, puts him in a sort of an echelon that there are only 2 or 3 clubs that can afford to do that kind of business. United, Barcelona have done it, Real Madrid have done it. Chelsea, whilst they spent 75 million on a goalkeeper, haven't really spent huge on individual players in a long time. Liverpool have never really done it except for Van Dijk. So, yeah, I think a player as good as Werner for as low a price as 51 million allows teams that are better than United but that have less money than United to, potentially get him, which makes me think that transfer is probably unlikely. The likes of Bayern Munich, of course, always a top destination for German players. Again, Chelsea, Liverpool, pretty much any team in the Premier League can afford a £51 million striker. So that is my only concern with the Werner thing. I know it sounds silly, but he's almost too cheap for United to be his first choice. People were saying we'd never get Fernandes, so never say never on Sancho. Yeah, exactly. Fernandes looked like it wasn't going to happen, didn't it? Talk coming out that we weren't interested in him in the summer, and then throughout January there was a sort of will he won't he type thing going on, and obviously, as we know, it took 3 weeks of the January transfer window to get him signed. Someone here saying we need Sancho and more, otherwise we're not getting back to being one of the best clubs in the world. Yeah, we're certainly 2 or 3 world-class players away from being anywhere near the likes of, Man City, Liverpool, Real Madrid, that kind of player, that kind of team. The consistency of those teams. I wouldn't complain with Koulibaly, but I don't think we need him. I'd rather get Issa Diop and spend better elsewhere. Grealish, Sancho and a striker. Again, Issa Diop, promising player, but what do we know about him? Does he actually improve our defensive line? Because one thing that I think Solskjaer's signings have done so far, even in the case of Dan James, who was a £15 million signing, who wasn't brought in maybe to play as many games as he has, they've all come in and been first-choice players in their position. He hasn't bought any squad players yet, except maybe Dan James will prove to be a squad player, but certainly this season he's been arguably United's first-choice winger after Marcus Rashford. So all of Solskjaer's signings so far have improved the first team and have allowed former first team players to be dropped into the reserves and into the sort of the substitute and rotation part of the squad. And is Issa Diop much better than Lindelof? Is he much better than Eric Bailly? We'll have to wait and see. But I think the people who've been linked to in Jadon Sancho and Jack Grealish, even in Timo Werner, would be players that would walk straight into United's starting 11 and allow the former players who we know aren't good enough to win leagues to challenge consistently for top 4, because we've seen them play over the last few years and they've not done it, allow them to become the subs and allow them to become the rotation players, which I think is probably the best way to do things at the moment with the current quality we have at the club. Mings is a player we could get on the cheap, but do we want someone as good as Tyrone Mings on the cheap? I think he's a decent player, but his team is probably going to get relegated, and whilst he is pretty good, is he any better than Victor Lindelof? I don't necessarily think so. Someone here saying we don't need players on the cheap. We need players who come in and have the impact Bruno has. Yeah, and I would have to agree with that. Obviously, that's the expensive way of doing things, and it will remain to be seen whether that's if the Glazers are willing to do it that way. But I think if we really want to challenge for trophies and consistently be inside the top 4, we need players that improve our first 11 at the moment, not players that come in and are maybe as good as the players we've already got. And I think Tyrone Mings isn't a clear and obvious improvement on Bailly or Lindelof. That's just my opinion. He has more fight than Lindelof. It's hard to quantify that, isn't it? I don't necessarily know what that means. I think Phil Jones has got more fight than Lindelof. I think Phil Jones has got more fight than pretty much anyone, but it doesn't make him the best option to play for Manchester United. I don't think, there are a lot of players who have a lot of fight, Andreas Pereira being one of them. But that doesn't mean that you are good enough to be challenging for a top 4 team. So we'll have to see. Much better in the air. Yeah, Mings is definitely better than Lindelof in the air. That's something I won't argue with. But again, there are a lot of centre-backs who are big, tall centre-backs who are great in the air, who aren't a better player than Victor Lindelof and who wouldn't get in United's side ahead of him. But we'll have to see. Koulibaly would be dearer than Bruno, so not worth it. Yeah, maybe. Robertson, Shaqiri, 2 or 3 cheap players isn't bad. Some might go on to be great like Robertson. Well, yeah, I'm not saying don't sign smaller players as well for less money, but I don't think someone like Issa Diop would be that kind of 15, 20 million signing. He'd be a lot of money. And Shaqiri, whilst he's been all right for Liverpool, he's not played many games and certainly recently hasn't been particularly good, or hasn't made much of an impact really. I think they are in a position where they have an excellent first team and they needed reinforcements in the squad. Liverpool were at the end of last season, whereas United is sort of the opposite, where we need excellent first team players to be brought in and then allow the players like Dan James or like maybe even, let's not say that, Pereira, Lingard, those kind of players to drop and be those kind of backup players rather than the other way around. We have the second best clean sheets in Europe. Our defence is doing their job. It's money better spent elsewhere. Yeah, the clean sheets thing is interesting. Obviously, United, I think we've got the 4th best defence in terms of goals conceded in the Premier League, which is all right. We'd expect to be somewhere up there because we're, 4th, 5th or 6th best team in the league, so why wouldn't we have a decent defence? But the clean sheets thing is an interesting one. Obviously, I think being in the Europa League helps that. Most of the other top teams in England, obviously Chelsea, Liverpool, City, and I can't remember the other one is, all in the Champions League, Arsenal, all in the Champions League. So that increases the sort of difficulty of opponents they're playing and decreases the chances of clean sheets. So I think it's slightly skewed, but even so, I think the defence is a relatively strong element of United's squad at the moment. Get Diop, fills out the squad a bit, and then focus on Sancho, Grealish. Yeah, do we need to fill out the squad? We've already got Chris Smalling who could come back and fill out the squad for free. He's obviously only on loan at Roma, so if we need to just fill out a squad, why not pick one of the best centre-backs in Italy and have him at United in Chris Smalling? Maybe that could be a decent shout. Anyway, right, we're going to be back in a little bit. We're going to have a My Man United from Jay Motti from Full Time Devils. And we're also going to have a podcast. We'll have David Pritt on there, our youth expert, to talk about the Cup games last night, as well as looking forward to the Derby game on Thursday. So thank you very much for joining us. Again, we'll be back in a little bit, so tune in for that. See you next time.